This is our new book. It's called An Adventure in London.
Adventure in London.
That's right. And look at these two girls and the boy. And those are waiting for their parents to pick them up, right? All right, let's start. Eric's mom was never late. But after the last bell at Gatlinburg Middle School had rung, Eric and his cousin Sasha were still waiting to be picked up. She's probably walking, Eric said. His mom was a river raft guide at Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Sometimes tourists show up without warning, and she squeezed them into her schedule. Shall I call my mom? Sasha asked. No, it's okay, Eric said. Mom never leaves me stranded. Just then, an old green station wagon pulled up and screeched to a stop. A woman with enormous sunglasses poked her head out. Boom! Hop in! You too! She shouted. Aunt Isa! The cousins exclaimed. They had not seen their Aunt Isa since she left for the Amazon rainforest 6 months earlier. She was their mom's youngest and wildest sister. She was always traveling and had explored much of the world on her trips. Sorry I'm late. I went to the elementary school first. Oops. Aunt Isa laughed as Eric and Sasha climbed in. Your mom is working, so it's just us this weekend, she said, waggling her eyebrows at Eric. Eric smiled, but as Aunt Isa hit the gas, he looked out the window and sighed. Weekend plans with Mom, his mom, would have to be postponed again. After taking Sasha to soccer practice, Aunt Isa and Eric headed home. His house felt different with her there, more alive. The radio was playing, the windows were open, and even Arnold, his lazy old dog, seemed more energetic. Should we bake brownies? She asked. Blow bubbles? Brew a volcano? I'm too old for that stuff, Eric groaned. As he sank into the couch. Aunt Isa squeezed her shoulder. You know, your mom would be here if she could. I know, Eric replied, but the weekend was going to be so fun. Who said it won't be? Aunt Isa demanded, hands on her lips. In fact, I just had a brilliant idea. 10 minutes later, a car honked outside. Honk, 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 honk. Eric peeked out the window. It was a taxi. They must have the wrong address, he said. But when he turned around, Aunt Isa was lugging suitcases toward the door. Grab your shoes and we'll miss our flight, she said. Our flight? Eric exclaimed. When did his aunt have time to plan a trip? He ran out the door after her. A change of scenery will be just the ticket, Aunt Isa declared, entering the taxi. To the airport, please, and then to London. London? Eric scrambled into the taxi, too. London is in a whole different country, Aunt Isa winked. Exactly. What about plane tickets, hotel reservations? Eric asked. Oh, things will work out. They always do. The taxi pulled away. Are you sure this is okay with my mom? Eric insisted. What's life without a little adventure? Aunt Isa replied. It was Eric's first flight overseas, and the view crossing the ocean took his breath away. Oh, I can't! believe this is real, he whispered as the plane landed and the pilot welcomed them to London. First, the subway. In London, it's called the Tube, Aunt Asa explained, breezing through a turnstile. Eric blinked. Has she even swiped a ticket? The turnstile let him through too. Maybe Aunt Asa had prepaid their fares. He didn't have time to wonder. The train arrived and everyone rushed aboard. Somehow, despite the crowd, Aunt Asa grabbed the last two seats. A few stops later, they reached a hotel where an energetic bellhop grabbed their bags and led them to a room without stopping at the front desk. Before Eric could catch his breath, they were back outside on the street of London. What's the plan? He asked. Why don't we play it by ear? Aunt Asa suggested. They began with a stroll along the river Thames. Tower Bridge, with its sturdy stone turrets, caught Eric's eye. He stopped by the riverbank to admire it. Fancy a lift? Called a voice from below. It was a man in a rowboat with two life vests on the empty seat. It seemed too good to be true. But Eric was beginning to realize that traveling with Aunt Asa led to all kinds of crazy coincidences. They hopped aboard, and the man rowed them up the Thames. Something about his face looked strangely familiar. Now we are beneath London Bridge, the boatman said. A short time later, he pointed. That's the Globe Theatre, venue of William Shakespeare and his famous plays. And this is Millennium Bridge, a bit modern for my taste, I must say. Eric and Aunt Asa hopped out at the next bridge, Westminster. The boatman tipped his hat. Suddenly, Eric recognized him. Was that William Shakespeare? Eric asked in disbelief. Oh, he's an old friend, Aunt Asa replied with a smile. Westminster Bridge was beautiful, but the real sight was Big Ben. The tower had a clock face on every side, keeping time for the entire city. Can you believe it still uses 1800s clockwork? Aunt Asa said. Suddenly, Eric had an idea, as wild as any of Aunt Asa's. Can we climb it? He asked. I think that can be arranged. With a finger to her lips, Aunt Asa led Eric through a door at Big Ben's base. Quiet as mice, they crept past the dozing watchmen, up 300 steps, through another door. Eric was speechless. Above them hung three enormous bells and a dazing web of letters, cocks, wheels, and knobs. Then the clock struck 12. Gong! Gong! Eric felt the vibrations of every chime from the top of his head down to his toes. The closest thing he could compare it to was being caught in a cave with his mom during a thunderstorm. Mom would love this, he said as they descended. I imagine she would, Aunt Asa agreed. We should be more behaved this time, Aunt Asa whispered. They were waiting with other tourists to enter Westminster Palace. Don't want to upset the Prime Minister. Eric enjoyed the tour. The palace was beautiful. He liked learning about how Parliament debated in chambers like the House of Commons and how people began petitioning the king or queen. It was also interesting to remember that this modern city and country were ruled by a monarch. After dinner, in a small place tucked away in an alley that may or may not have been a restaurant, Eric and Aunt Asa wandered back to the hotel. This whole city is incredible, but Big Ben was my favorite part, Eric admitted. Aunt Asa looked at him with a spark in her eyes, just as a regal woman wrapped in furs glided toward them. A scoundrelling boy about Eric's age trailed behind her. My son doesn't appreciate the finer things, but perhaps you will, she said, thrusting a trinket in Eric's hand and marching off, the angry boy still in tow. Eric looked down and astonished to find he was holding a tiny version of a clock tower. It chimed just like the real one. King, king, king. The next morning, they rode a red double-decker bus around the city, taking photos from the top. Then they had to catch their flight home. Eric couldn't believe their trip was already at an end. Once you've been bitten by the travel bug, there's no going back. Aunt Isa warned as they unpacked Eric's suitcase together late that night. So next time my mom has to work, can we take another trip? Can Shasha come? Eric asked. Before Aunt Isa could answer, the front door slammed. Boom! Mom! Eric shouted and ran downstairs. Hey, buddy! His mom gave Eric a hug. What did you and your Aunt Isa get up to this weekend? You won't even believe me, Eric began, launching into the story of their trip. Just as he finished, Aunt Isa came rushing downstairs. I've got to go, she exclaimed, hugging them both. Thanks for looking after Eric. Sounds like you had quite the adventure, Eric's mom said with a wink. Anytime, Aunt Isa said. She hurried out the door. Don't you believe me? Eric said, but his mom was already walking down the hall. It seems you had a wonderful time, whatever you two were doing, she said as she closed the bathroom door. Eric pulled the tiny clock tower out of his pocket just as it began to chime midnight. Ding, ding, ding.